Hey y'all, so today we are on page 65 of A Farewell to Manzanar, and we are going to dive into the first paragraph. Now, you should have already read that first paragraph. If you haven't, pause the video and go ahead and do so. We are going to focus on this sentence that says, this kind of emasculation was suffered in one form or another by all the men interned at Manzanar. So take a second to think about what this sentence means in your opinion, and obviously answers may vary. One more time, that sentence reads, this kind of emasculation was suffered in one form or another by all the men interned at Manzanar. And so if you need more time, go ahead and pause the video, but we are going to focus on the first chunk. It says this kind of emasculation. So can you figure out the meaning of emasculation? Use your affix list and page 65 to help you. Okay, so it is the state of being weaker, less effective, or of losing one's male role or identity. And this is a noun, right? So now let's move on to the second chunk. Now, the second chunk says was suffered in one form or another. So what do you notice about the structure of the verb phrase was suffered? Remember, a verb is what you do. So if you look at the phrase was suffered, you know that this was done in the past, right? It is a passive voice. So what does it mean to suffer something? Was suffered. And that is correct. To experience something unpleasant, painful, or distressing. So then the question becomes, well, what was suffered? Well, for that, now you will need the chunk that comes before it. It says this kind of emasculation was suffered. So we know that we are talking about emasculation. Now we have these two commas, and inside of them it says in one form or another. So let's think about why the authors inserted in one form or another here with commas. Think about when you're reading something, was suffered in one form or another. That little pause, that's what the commas are for. So the commas create a pause that provide emphasis. This lets us know that it is important information. So then you look at, well, what does the author's use of in one form or another tell us about the emasculation that was suffered? So it says this kind of emasculation was suffered in one form or another. Well, that lets us know that it happened in more than one way and was likely different for different people. The emasculation wasn't always the same, which is why in one form or another. And so now we have chunk 3, and it says, by all the men interned at Manzanar. So who suffered this emasculation? All the men at Manzanar. And keep in mind that all the men at Manzanar. So take a second and think about what happened to the men that interned at Manzanar and how did they feel as a result of their environment. Okay, so obviously answers might vary. Everybody might have something different, but you should definitely keep in mind that some of the men interned at Manzanar challenge parts of their identities that they saw as male. And this led them feeling emasculated by that environment. So let's look at the entire sentence, right? It says, this kind of emasculation was suffered in one form or another by all the men interned at Manzanar. So how does the meaning of this sentence change if we write it in maybe the active voice? Keep in mind, the active voice would be all the men interned at Manzanar suffered this kind of emasculation in one form or another. So if we change it to an active voice, the emphasis definitely shifts from emasculation to all the men interned. So let's think about how we can emphasize other things. So how can we write a sentence in active voice that starts with the US government to emphasize that they were the ones responsible for the emasculation of the men interned at Manzanar? And so you would make that as direct as possible. The US government emasculated. In one form or another, we still want to emphasize that all the men interned at Manzanar. So now think about what you think this sentence means, and everyone's answer is going to be the same. The US government emasculated, in one form or another, all the men interned at Manzanar. And then take a second to answer the question, how does a language dive add to your understanding of the guiding question? Well, what were the causes and impacts of Japanese American internment camps? Remember, this is a impact. So what were the causes and impacts of Japanese American internment camps? How does this sentence add to your understanding of that question? Now, once you are done, turn it in however your teacher directed you to. And if you have any questions, please make sure that you ask them. Have a wonderful day, y'all.